Today I'd love to share with you some really juicy line and trap that I found against the Vienna Gambit. Now, the Vienna Gambit arises after white goes pawn e4, pawn e5, and here white continues with knight to c3. In fact, a lot of chess coaches and influencers preach the Vienna Gambit for white as a way to get off the mainstream theory, and here after you play some move, white goes into pawn to f4, which is somewhat similar to the King's Gambit. It already challenges you, and if you're caught unprepared, it's very easy to go down. For example, the most natural and most played move by black here is to accept this gambit pawn, which allows white to push this center pawn forward, attack your knight, and all of a sudden it turns out there's no good square for this knight to go to. Black is forced to retreat the knight all the way back to g8, which already gives white a much more superior position with great attacking chances. So let me show you a much trickier way how to turn the situation around. After your opponent has played this move pawn to f4, you counter-strike in the center of the board by playing pawn to d5. And offense is the best defense remains to be a great strategy for different situations, including this one. Now, you're also counter-attacking a lot in the center, and while you usually grab this pawn on e5, in the vast majority of the cases, occasionally they'll take this pawn on d5. And we're going to cover both. Let's start with the most popular move, pawn takes e5. Now that attacks your knight, so you recapture the other pawn on e4. And now you've got this great centralized knight, which white has to deal with somehow. The move which they play in most cases is queen to f3, trying to put more pressure onto this knight, forcing you to trade it off. You may wonder why white does not want to just take it that way. Well, if they do, you recapture with a pawn, and that's pretty good for you, because now this pawn on e4 deprives the white knight of the natural development square. If they try to move this pawn, you can also capture it by your pawn. So life's good here, and that's not really what white wants. And by the way, white is also completely passive here. So let's take it back. Again, in most cases, white wants to play queen f3, put more pressure onto this knight, trying to force you to trade it off so that white has more open space and diagonals to attack you later. And what I suggest you do instead here is to start applying some counter tricks. You play knight to c6 first, kind of pretending like you just want to grab this pawn. And in this position, your opponent will likely to calculate the line I take, he takes, and I win a pawn. And so they'll gladly capture this knight, expecting you to recapture, which allows them to win the central pawn. But instead, you toss in a very nasty in-between move, knight to d4, which comes as a very unpleasant surprise for white. Now you're attacking this queen on f3, and also this pawn on c2, and from there it's gonna fork the king and the rook. That's quite a big problem for white. Here, in most cases, your opponent will find out that they need to solidify their position, and they'll play yet another run move, queen to d3. And after this move, white's position is already lost completely. So now you take here on e4, white recaptures, so far so good, looks like white is pawn up, but what your opponent has missed is that you've got this move bishop to f5, skewing the queen as well as this pawn on c2. And after the queen moves somewhere, basically your knight is gonna jump. No, that is not possible because your knight is defended. So after the queen moves somewhere, your knight is going to jump over there on c2, deliver a fork to the king and the rook, and thus get a winning game. For example, if white captures on b7, you could play knight takes c2 right away, but even stronger is to play rook b8 first, gaining one more tempo to attack this queen. And after queen goes somewhere, this game white played queen to a6. Now you can freely, get there, put white's king in trouble, and win a rook, thus achieving a totally winning game. Going back a couple moves, we know that queen takes e4 loses to bishop f5. Alright, now here's a little puzzle for you. What if white realizes that and plays queen to c3 instead? So try to find the winning shot for black, and if you can, write it down in the comments below. If your opponent is more advanced, it might be that he's aware of that trap and he won't play the most natural move, knight takes e4, although it will be rare. In most cases, they will fall for our main trap. But what if they are aware of the fact that you're not going to recapture, but you're going to jump with your knight to d4? Well, in that case, your opponent will probably play bishop b5, the move suggested by the computer, so that your knight is pinned and can no longer jump over there to d4. And now they still hope that they're putting pressure here and you're going to do something with this knight. But in this case, I've prepared another tricky line for you. You just play bishop to e6 and you still ignore the fact that white is attacking this knight. So at this point, your opponent will likely think, hey, now I can finally take it for free, and they'll enthusiastically grab your knight on e4, winning a pawn, thinking that life's good. They're also threatening this knight right now together with the queen, but you play bishop to d5, and that's why we had this bishop on e6 on the previous move. And now you still make use of the exposed position of white's queen. And if the queen goes away somewhere, you can grab this pawn on g2. In most cases, they'll drop back to e2. If they play queen g4, it's all the same stuff. You play h5 first, attacking the queen, and they'll anyway drop it back to e2. And what you do then is you play queen h4 check, and you start kind of counterattacking. You're ready to castle queenside. You see that you have a lead in development, and white's position is already really unpleasant. In most cases, they play g3, trying to push your queen back, but that is a fatal flaw in white's position. Now, this diagonal is weakened, and you can reinforce the threat by playing queen e4, putting up this battery along this diagonal, and there is no way for white to save the material, to save the rook. Well, in fact, they'll have to give up the knight over here, but anyway, they're losing material, and that's how you win, basically within a couple moves. Going back to the starting position of the Vienna Gambit, right after you counter strike in the center with a move pawn to d5, we have analyzed pawn takes e4, and after that you got this Trojan horse on e4, and whenever white tries to capture it, somehow it backfires. Now, let's go back and let's take a look at one more opportunity that white has here, pawn takes d5. It's a lot easier for you to handle that thing. You simply recapture, because this knight is defended by the queen, therefore you don't lose it. If white captures, cool, you'll have very active queen in the middle of the board. And also this pawn on f4 is in trouble, you're attacking it, that's why they're very likely to capture on e5. But then there's a very standard thing here, you first trade on c3 and you still play this queen h4 check. One of the disadvantages of the early movement of this f-pawn is that it weakens this diagonal. And you can take advantage of this fact if white goes g3, your queen slides to the middle of the board, and somehow once again this rook on h1 is lost and you're winning the game. By the way, there is no way for white to somehow capture your queen in there in the corner, because after knight to f3 you can go bishop g4 or bishop h3, and certainly the queen is not trapped, in fact it's pretty active. And finally, there is one more very useful tactical pattern. In this position so far we've covered the main line of the Vienna Gambit with the move pawn to f4. Some of your opponents might play bishop c4 first, and their idea is to prepare this move pawn f4 and play it in a comfortable situation for them. Against this move bishop c4, there is a common tactical trick, knight takes e4, which is a temporary sacrifice of the knight because you're going to get it back right